Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Your Views on the News with me, Azad Ali. Undercover and covert policing has been a long-standing method used by the law enforcement agencies to gather and infiltrate and build cases against major criminals and crime syndicates. But this week, headlines have been dominated by revelations triggered by the whistleblower Peter Francis, his confession about a smear campaign that targeted members of the Lawrence family and a friend of Stephen Lawrence, who was murdered over two decades ago. Now, this shocking news has given rise to demands for a closer scrutiny of this policing tactic, and how is it sanctioned and what mechanisms are in place to protect innocent people from being smeared, as has been alleged. While officials at the police, at Metropolitan Police, have denied such claims, the public has grown increasingly concerned at these tactics. So why has the Metropolitan Police undertaken such alleged tactics? Are they right to do this? And do you think there are circumstances in which covert intelligence gathering is acceptable, or does this behaviour violate individual privacy and rights to be treated fairly by a service that, after all, we the taxpayers pay for? Now, joining me in the studio to discuss all of these and answer any calls that you have is Brian Paddick, who's a former Deputy Police Commissioner and a current advisor to Dwayne Brooks, who is alleged to have been smeared by the police and undercover tactics. And also joining me is Shanice Mcbean, Chair of Defend the Right to Protest Committee. Good evening, and thank you both for joining me. If I can ask you, Brian, first. Obviously now this allegation is actually very concerning because, I mean, one can understand police using undercover tactics to build and gather intelligence and build a case against major criminals. But here it seems a friend of someone who was murdered, a family whose son was murdered, they were kind of almost allegedly smeared by the police.
Well, this is the allegation that is being made. The Metropolitan Police are actually saying they don't know whether the allegations are true or not. But let's assume that they're true, that the police have used undercover officers to try and smear the character of not just the Lawrence family, the family of the murdered victim, but also of Dwayne Brooks, who was a friend of Stephen Lawrence. Stephen died in Dwayne Brooks's arms, and Dwayne Brooks is himself a victim of attempted murder. And that they were using covert tactics to try and discredit these individuals. Why were they trying to do that? Well, it would appear these people in a campaign for justice were causing problems for the police, and therefore it looks very much like the police were trying to make that problem go away, undermine public sympathy for the campaign by trying to find evidence that could show that these were bad people.
Shanice, I mean, what Brian said here, especially at the end, that, you know, to undermine the sense of injustice that the people were feeling at the lack of prosecution and conviction of the murderers of Stephen Lawrence. Is this something, the campaign that you're working on, is it something new? Are you shocked by it, surprised by it?
Well, no, I'm not shocked, unfortunately, because I think we have to go a little bit deeper than Brian did, because you have to remember at the time that the Stephen Lawrence case was going on, not only did police fail to arrest suspects when they arrived on the scene, they failed to implement proper first aid. So all the while that was going on and they were failing to provide justice for the Stephen Lawrence's family, they were also colluding, you know, allegedly colluding with one of the fathers of a suspect. So I think this actually raises fundamental questions that we do deal with a lot with Defend the Right to Protest, and that's the role and the nature of the police. The Stephen Lawrence campaigns were implemented to try and achieve justice for a racist attack. Meanwhile, the police were undermining that justice campaign. And for us, that raises the fundamental question, is the role of the police to protect and implement justice, or is it to protect a select few group of, you know, people at the top who they choose to protect?
Well, Brian, I mean, you're been a police officer for a long time. What is the role of the police? Is it not to serve the public and serve justice?
Absolutely, and that's what the police are supposed to be. They're supposed to be servants of the public. They are supposed to listen to what the priorities of the public are and to respond to those. But unfortunately, for too long, the police have decided to pursue their own priorities rather than the priorities of the people who, as you've said in your introduction, pay for them.
And I mean, what a lot of the listeners, viewers on Islam Channel, I mean, they've also had concerns about policing tactics, undercover operations, entrapment, all of these kind of things that have happened since, if you like, 9/11 and in particular 7/7. And all at this same time, you know, there is this public image given that the police are working with the communities. But, you know, from what I've just heard, I mean, these revelations, I mean, if we go back to Hillsborough as well, these revelations, I mean, they're very damning. So why haven't the Metropolitan Police come out very strongly to say something on this matter that they're investigating? I mean, I know the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister have kind of called on immediate investigations.
Well, presumably, I mean, Bernard Hogan-Howe is the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police in London now, was not around in the Metropolitan Police when all this was going on.
Sure.
So it is completely feasible that he doesn't know what the answer is. And in fact, the majority of senior officers who were in charge at the time have subsequently retired. So there does need to be an investigation even to inform the Commissioner about what was going on. Now, you know, if there are terrorist organisations, serious and organised crime groups, where the only way to try and defeat them is to infiltrate them by having undercover officers, then that is a legitimate tactic. But this is completely different. This is trying to make life difficult for people because they are protesting about the police. That's what makes it fundamentally different.
Well, it's not just protesting about the police, it's also highlighting police failings, and that will reflect badly on the police. That's the reason, it would seem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can see this reflected in the cover-up in Hillsborough, and you can see it all throughout, you know, the history of the police and the way in which they respond to things that they tend to fudge or mess up. So you asked earlier whether it's a surprise. It isn't a surprise. And I think actually if we go back to the history of the police were not set up as an organisation in 1829, the Metropolitan Police, to protect the community. They were actually set up to squash protest. So that's the historical role of the police, and you can see that reflected in the role that the police play even today. And so I think you're a bit optimistic to say that the role of the police is to serve the community.
Okay. That's a very interesting point, and on that point, we're going to take a break. It is coming up to Maghrib Azan time and prayer time. We will carry on the discussion and take your phone calls, inshallah, after the break. Do tune back in. See you in a bit. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Your Views on the News with me, Azad Ali. Now, just before the break, we were discussing about this alleged smear campaign against Stephen Lawrence's family and one of Stephen Lawrence's friend, Dwayne Brooks. And Shanice, you mentioned the point, which is quite interesting, that the police were set up to actually deal with protests.
Yeah.
And part of the revelations across the week was also this documentary about undercover policing. Especially undercover policing of environmentalist group, anti-fascist group and everything else, which has also led to how the police behaved whilst they were undercover. You know, some officers having sexual relationships, having children and everything else. It's actually caused a lot of concern. Now, coming from an organisation that is defending people's rights to protest, I mean, what are your key concerns? I mean, what do you see as problem, how the police kind of deal with this situation?
Well, I think it goes back to the reason why they're going undercover, and the reason why they're going undercover is to find out information about people so that they can either deter them from engaging in their activities or somehow, you know, prevent them from protesting. And protest is one of those fundamental rights that you expect to have regardless of whether you're an environmentalist activist or an anti-fascist activist. But unfortunately, the way in which the police have been, you know, shown to behave contradicts your fundamental right to protest. But I think it's also important to draw out the way in which they operate not when they're undercover, but when they're right in front of you. So on the 1st of June, there was an EDL demonstration in London, and 58 anti-fascists were arrested for standing on the streets and linking arms together, and they were supposedly arrested for standing in the wrong place. Meanwhile, you've got racists on the streets who are, you know, protesting and saying Muslims and hate preachers out. So that demonstration showed again, and it reflects the way in which they operate undercover. It shows that our, you know, fundamental rights to protest are often repressed and suppressed, and you can see that going back to the Lawrence campaign as well. Their campaign was attempting to be suppressed.
Yeah. Okay, the phone lines are open, viewers. If you have views on the subject we're discussing, which is undercover policing, how far are police allowed to go, and should police be working undercover in the first place? Do you think it's the right thing to do or not? Now, one of the things, Brian, is that within the Muslim tradition, a lot of people, they don't believe in this kind of spying approach. You know, if someone's committed a crime, then yeah, they need to be prosecuted. That's understood. But actually spying on someone to see if they commit a crime or not is problematic. Now, the distinction I want to draw on this kind of issue is where you know someone is a criminal, they've committed crimes, but you just haven't got the evidence, so you go undercover to find the evidence, as opposed to infiltrating, say, protest groups and others to see if they are going to plan anything nasty. I mean, do you think both are okay from a policing point of view?
I think as far as the special demonstration squad, this unit that this undercover officer was in, their role was that there had been, you know, a series of riots on the streets of London. Brixton riots in 1981, more riots in 1985. And the ideal, if you like, was to make sure that these protest groups weren't going to lead to major disorder on the streets like we saw in 81 and 85. And therefore, the idea was for those people to join those organisations and to feed back information to the police to make sure that that sort of level of disorder didn't happen. That was what was said was the reason for having those undercover officers there. Now, different people had different interpretations about what that was about. You know, we've heard just now that some people think that it was to suppress the demonstrations. The police would say that it was to try to prevent people being killed, violence on the streets, damage to property and destruction.
And the police have actually also got a duty not to just the protesters but to the wider public. So I think they would use that as an argument. Okay, let's take a caller. I believe Amna from East London is on the line. Assalamu alaikum, Amna.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. You're on air. Your views, please.
Can I? Hello?
Hello? Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, brilliant. I just wanted to ask Shanice a question.
Yeah? Yes, go ahead.
I'm really interested in the organisation Defend the Right to Protest, if Shanice could tell us more about that, because as a young black woman in East London, I don't really feel very protected by the police when I try to exercise my right to protest. And I guess really why has there been such an increase in police brutality with young black and Asian youth in the Muslim community? And a question for the police officer, why is that when the EDL attack Muslim Islamic schools, that's referred to as hate crimes and not terrorism?
Okay, thank you, Amna, for your questions. Shanice, do you want to take the first one?
Yeah, absolutely. So Defend the Right to Protest was set up as a way of counteracting police repression that you saw on the rise following the rise of protests in the midst of the economic crisis of 2008. And I just want to link that back to a question the question that Amna raised, but also something that you raised around police brutality, because a major reason why the police say they go undercover is to stop riots from happening. But we have to be absolutely clear. If we look to the Brixton riots, and if we look to the Notting Hill Carnival riots, and if we look to the 2011 riots, they were started because of police brutality, and they were initiated because the police had attacked someone. So I think if the police really want to prevent riots from occurring, then they have to form better relationships between Black and Asian and Muslim communities. And that's one of the roles that Defend the Right to Protest plays, you know, bringing to the fore the contradictions of the police between what they say and then what they do on the other hand.
Yeah, and I think the question that I'm going to ask second was about how crimes are treated. So the point she was raising is that, you know, what the EDO is doing, attacking mosques and everything else, it's not seen as terrorism. And in particular, if I can draw the attention of the mosque in Warsaw, Aisha Mosque, where a bomb had actually gone off outside the mosque. The police immediately said this isn't a terrorist incident, and they've got no evidence to say it's not a terrorist incident. But a lot of people in the community, and perhaps Amna as well, were thinking, well, if this bomb was left outside a church or outside a synagogue or outside somewhere else, immediately, before you knew what the motive was, it would have been treated as a terrorist incident.
I don't know why the police did not describe that incident where a bomb goes off. You know, bombs are designed to terrorise a particular community, and calling it terrorism should not be restricted to depending on whether it's the majority white population who are terrorised, or whether it's the Black and minority ethnic community or the Muslim community that are terrorised. You know, the police are making things a lot worse for themselves by denying that those sorts of activities are terrorism. Now, you know, if, for example, you know, that somebody went and smashed up a church, I don't know whether anybody would describe that as terrorism. I think people would describe that as you know, maybe a religious hate crime. And so to that extent, I think the police are right. But when it comes to, you know, exploding bombs, it is deliberately it is deliberately trying to terrorise a community.
And just going back to our topic of discussion, I mean, you know, you said the reason the riots took place was because of the police behaviour in the first place, and which I'm not saying it isn't true, but the point that Brian made was that isn't it right for the police to do some level of undercover work to determine you know, what can take place, because it's more information they have, the better policing methodology and tactics they can deploy.
Well, I think it goes back to the distinction that you made earlier between going undercover when you have evidence that someone's going to do something wrong, and going undercover just for the sake of going undercover to find out information, to try and suppress what people are doing. If you have a suspect who you have evidence is about to do something wrong and is going to harm the community, then another way of gathering evidence could be to go undercover. If, however, like in Birmingham, the way in which they did it in 2010, which was put surveillance cameras over an entire community, and you're going to stigmatise an entire community, and that kind of surveillance is, first of all, racial profiling and Islamophobic and completely out of order.
And would you agree with that distinction, Brian, that where, I mean, from my point of view, and probably from our viewers' point of view, I mean, we can understand where there's a suspect, and you know, you worry and you fear that something is going to happen, why you need to go undercover and maybe tap their phones, all of that kind of stuff. But you know, an environmentalist group, Greenpeace, why do you need to target these groups?
Well, there has to be intelligence to say that whatever organisation it is that's going to be infiltrated by undercover officers is in some way either a threat to national security or a threat to the security of people on the street because they have violent intentions. Now, you know, we can argue whether or not that intelligence existed about the groups that these undercover officers infiltrated. The police would say, and I have no knowledge of any of this, it wasn't my area of policing. I was, you know, always in uniform and serving the community. But officers would say, in charge would say that they had intelligence that these people had criminal intent, that they wanted to cause violent disorder on the streets, or they wanted to try and undermine the government, and that's why they put undercover officers in there. Of course, the protest groups would say that that was not the case.
Even that argument which you just put forward, say I was going to accept it and I accept it, the problem people have and the public have is they have no way of knowing and holding that to account. How do we know that there was intelligence? So is there someone overseeing this whole process? Is there an independent group, independent body that kind of looks at all of these operations and just kind of the decision-making processes and says, okay, yeah, there was intelligence and they followed a process which was fair?
I mean, this is the whole problem with undercover policing and the security services. We don't know because it's secret. Now, if, for example, you had police officers or other agents of the state who had managed to infiltrate an Irish Republican terrorism gang, for example, then clearly if there was any sort of openness about what was going on, the life of that undercover officer would be put in danger because these would be very dangerous people that we're talking about.
Sure.
And I don't think anybody would argue that to try and prevent a terrorist outrage was not a legitimate use of an undercover officer. But in order to have openness and accountability around that, it's almost impossible because of the nature of the policing that they are doing.
Okay. Well, let's see what Sarah from Leeds has to say. Assalamu alaikum, Sarah.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
You're on air. Your views, please.
Yes, I had that experience today. I was sitting and eating in a takeaway place, and this Asian person came in, and he was talking about, he was actually an undercover policeman, and he was explaining to the guy like if he wanted the community to get involved with as well. So I think it's a really good idea later in the community knowing, so everybody can look out for each other as well. You know, and I think it's a great idea. Trying to not put themselves in risk, but working with the community as well, keeping our children and our family safe. Really, I mean, we don't feel safe. Like even walking down the street, we don't even feel safe no more because there's been about a couple of days ago, 3 days ago, somebody got stabbed down the road from my house.
And why was that? Was that a racist crime that took place?
It wasn't a racist. It's just people stabbing each other.
Right. So it's just what, gangs or young people?
Yeah, drug dealers.
Drug dealers. Okay.
Yeah, I mean everybody, and there was children outside, watching it, and it was just terrible. I mean, we live in a society now. It's like, we don't feel safe. Even going to the shop buying something, it's not. We don't even let our children even to play outside the front door.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, brother. Thank you so much.
No problem. Walaikum assalam. Shanice, and there are a lot of people who actually have this concern that, it's not safe out there. We want the police to be more visible. They need to do more. So it is a question of balance, as Brian kind of mentioned. So some of that intelligence gathering, having undercover officers kind of working within the community does give certain amount of reassurance to people.
I think it can give reassurance, but if we're talking about the crimes that the lady was speaking about over the phone, well, actually, if you look at, say, violent crimes that happen on the streets, drug crimes, all of these tend to increase in times of economic crisis, when people don't have jobs, when people feel completely alienated, when, the standard of education's falling. So I can understand how it would be reassuring to have a police presence on the streets. But if we're going to actually prevent these crimes, it's not going to take undercover police officers infiltrating and, damaging people's rights. What it's going to take is the rebuilding of a society on the basis of egalitarianism, where we share and distribute resources in a way that means we can all live decent lives.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people do and have said we've covered this topic in another show where there's almost a too much burden put and too much kind of trust and kind of reliance put on the police to solve all of these problems, when the society as a whole has to really come together to not allow criminality and crimes to kind of go, people turn a blind eye. So say something is taking place, a mugging or an incident is taking place, people kind of look the other way because they don't want to get involved, they don't want the hassle themselves. So there's a societal issue here anyway. But just since we're talking about undercover operations, what are the kind of red lines that undercover officers shouldn't pass? This is another area of discussion. I mean, fine, you've got a good reason, you've got intelligence to go undercover. But whilst you're undercover, what are the red lines? Because that was also the subject area of the kind of dispatches program that we had earlier this week as well.
Well, the program, the documentary that we saw, showed women who had, one of whom had fathered, one of the other undercover officers had fathered a child with this woman, where she genuinely believed him to be an activist, a political activist, not a police officer. And, I don't think there's any other word for it than rape, because she did not consent to have sex with this police officer. She would never have consented to it if she had known who he really was. And clearly that's completely unacceptable. Developing emotional relationships with people and then emotionally impacting on them, on their lives, because they've had that relationship.
But, I mean, I understand the point you're making, but in life, there's a lot of people, and it's not just men and women, do it as well, who kind of have a persona. They lie to get what they want. This is. Yeah, I mean, the point I'm trying to get to, not that I justify. I actually agree 100% with what you've said.
I understand.
But it's just to bring out this other point that when you're trying to gather information and everything else, you pretend, you lie to get that. So. Are you saying that there's only a certain amount of that you're allowed to do? Because saying your name is Jack when your name is Azad is a lie. So you've started on that kind of track.
You have to disguise your identity, of course you do. But the idea, you can't forget what your job is. Your job is to gather intelligence about a protest group which your bosses believe are going to cause violence on the street or whatever the reason, the official reason is for doing it. But to get it involved emotionally with those people,
so
to have sex with those people, you are a police officer at the end of the day, whether you are undercover or not. You're not. I mean, from what you're saying, it's saying, well, a lot of people in society are Islamophobic, or a lot of people in society are racist. So why don't you allow police officers to be that? Because they are in a position of authority. They have powers that nobody else has. They can use force against people, and the standards of behaviour that we expect from them is different from what we expect from other people.
Okay, let's see what Musa from London has to say. Assalamu alaikum, Musa. Musa?
Hello?
Hello, assalamu alaikum, you're on air, your views please.
Basically, my question is in relation to the Mcbean report and institutional racism in the police.
Sure.
Because a resounding thing that came out of the report was that obviously the police were described as institutionally racist. And I think if you look at the statistics today in relation to stop and search, in 1999, you were 6 times more likely as a black ethnic minority to be stop and searched than a white person. But today the figures have almost quadrupled, and you're 28 times more likely now to be stop and searched than a white person. Again, if you look at the figures of deaths in police custody, I think it's 1,433 people have died in police custody or care since 1990, and a larger portion of those people are black. So I was wondering whether the speakers could comment on just the kind of increasing racism inside of the police force when we were told that was going to be combated. And another general point that I wanted to make was just that the problems with the police in this country also seem to be replicated in other countries. If you look right now at Turkey and Brazil, for example, one of the key things that's led to thousands of protesters coming out onto the streets has been the police repression and police brutality, where it's been uses of tear gas, pepper spray, attacking women and children on demonstrations. So this kind of problem isn't just tied to Britain, it's also a global problem that we're seeing with the way that police forces are used to repress protests, but also operate in a racist manner.
Okay, thank you, Musa, for your points. Just before I come back to my guest, I'll take another call. I believe Isia or Asia, I'm not sure if I've got the name right, from Walthamstow. Hello, assalamu alaikum. Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Yeah, I just want to have a word in this case.
Sure. You're on air. Make your views known, please.
Yeah, this morning.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Can you put the volume on your television down, because I think there's a time delay taking place?
Yeah, I just read a leaflet. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum salam. You're on air, sister.
Yeah, I just read a leaflet
Yeah.
this morning about what happened in the bus.
What happened?
Yeah, and they explain it in detail. Be careful in the bus, and you need to be careful in your bag, especially your bags, your wallet. There is a group of people, they work as a team.
Okay.
And the camera in the bus, they catch these people.
Okay.
But how are we going to deal with the team? If it's a team, they work each other, how are we going to deal with it?
Right, okay.
Only the one responsible is the police.
Okay, good point there, sister. Okay, let's take one more. Ahmed, calling also from London. Hello, Ahmed. Ahmed? Ahmed? Okay, we've lost Ahmed. Okay, if we go to the point that Musa raised, I mean, I'm not sure about his statistics. I mean, they might not be as accurate, but the point he's really raising, 1991, institutionally racist. 2 decades on, I mean, we've heard Doreen Lawrence really she didn't say it in these words, but, really say it's not really changed much. I mean, do you think it has changed, it's improved?
Some things have changed enormously. So the way in which the victims of hate crime, for example, are dealt with, the police now recognise how much more serious a hate crime is, where people are being targeted because they're from a minority background. That is recognised. The support that is given to victims of hate crime is much better than it used to be. The victims of murder now have family liaison officers they didn't have in the past. So there's a lot of things on a sort of policy level that have changed. And have changed very positively. Unfortunately, the experience of young black and minority ethnic people on the street has not changed that much. As you say, the figures aren't quite right. I think it is now about one in 9, one in 7, something like that. More likely to be stopped and searched if you're black than if you're white. But that is worse than it was at the time of the publication of the Macpherson report. And that is unacceptable. The difficulty is politicians in this country have not taken this issue seriously. They have not put pressure on the police. And the police haven't done anything about it because in order to address the issue, they would have to admit that there was racial profiling going on, which is something that they don't want to do. They don't want to admit that there is that at least the outcomes are racist, even if the officers aren't.
Yeah, and this point about profiling, I mean, you mentioned that earlier. A lot of NGOs, organisations that are working in the criminal justice arena overall, they have this concern that there is actually profiling going on. And I mean, you'd think after 20 years after Macpherson, all of this kind of maturity that, we're expecting from the police, that honest discussion would take place. I mean, if it is happening, why not say it's happening and explain it, why you're doing it? Yeah,
I mean, just to reiterate, it's an incredibly worrying situation, the fact that stop and search has actually increased if you're black and Asian, because crime in general has gone down. And according to Home Office data, the likelihood of someone being arrested and then convicted from a stop and search is also much less than it was 10 years ago. So the fact then, even in this context, you're seeing an increase in the amount of times that black and Asian people are being stopped on the streets is incredibly worrying. At the same time, I think the reason why there isn't a genuine discussion going on is because politics in general, and it does have an effect on the police, has taken a massive shift to the right. Since the economic crisis, you've seen the huge scapegoating of immigrant and black and Asian communities. And I think this genuinely does then feed into how the police relate to these communities on the streets.
Okay. Let's take a couple of more callers and I'll come back to you guys. I believe Jonathan is on the line. From Manchester, yes. Jonathan, good evening.
Good evening, how are you?
Yeah, not bad. Thank you for your call. You're on air. Your views, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I just wanted to ask a question to the officer. So with the stuff around the Olympics, I mean, policing is, massively increased, and also don't think that it is, kind of to do with, increasing crime as the speaker's trying to allude to, because, where I live and my friends live in London, there's a lot of stuff around the border agencies, and they are stopping and searching and checking people's passports a lot more now. So I wondered what the officer had to say about that.
Okay, just to say, Brian is not an officer anymore, but I'm sure no worries. I'm sure from his experience he'll answer. Okay, let me take one more caller, maybe a couple more callers. Sabine from London. Sabina? Hello, assalamu alaikum, Sabina.
Hello, walaikum salam.
You're on air. Your views, please, sister.
Hi, good evening to all the panel.
Hi.
I'd like to ask a question relating to undercover policing, because I've just tuned in not long ago, so I understand that's what you're discussing also.
Yeah.
Whether this is being implemented into schools, whether parents and teachers are being involved.
Okay.
That's my question.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's take one more caller, Asma from London. Assalamu alaikum, Asma.
Thank you very much. Let's take one more caller, Asma.
Asma?
Yes,
Alaikum salam, you're on air.
Yes, not so long ago, we also heard that Stephen Lawrence's brother was harassed by the police, and there was an outcry when he complained. And it now seems to be true of what he said at the time, because now we're learning that his family was secretly thought about. And also, is it because they're from a black minority or Asians, or does it have undercover agents throughout for every race or religious group within the country? Because it seems as though it's just because he was from a black family, because the person who actually, I think they've got 2 people locked up now who actually did the crime, and why weren't they investigated? Why did it take so long to bring these people to justice? They should have been the ones that had the undercover policing so as to catch the criminals who actually killed that person.
Yeah,
And
okay.
not the other way around.
Okay, Asma.
We're supposed to be trusting the police, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, we should be. Okay, Asma, thank you for your views. Let me ask the first question to Brian, which Jonathan raised, which is about the SDS, this unit, this undercover unit. Does it still exist, or is it transformed into something? I mean, does this undercover work still happen?
Well, I don't know. I left the Metropolitan Police in May 2007. Was forced out over speaking out against the shooting of the innocent Brazilian Jean-Charles de Menezes. But the commissioner this week has said that they still have undercover officers, and he defended the use of undercover officers.
So it
is. Other people have said that this unit, the Special Demonstration Squad, was disbanded, but it's been replaced by something with a different name.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that this sort of thing is still going on.
And the kind of the other point which Sabina asked is, well, whilst undercover work is taking place, are they approaching schools and teachers and all of these things?
I would not have thought so. I would have, this is supposed to be. This is supposed to be serious and organised crime, or where there are organisations that either are trying to undermine the government or are planning violent disorder on the streets. That's where they should be working. That's where they should be deployed.
And Shanice, what Asma, the point she was trying to get at really is, the reason the police were undercover and kind of looking for things to use against the Lawrence family is because they were raising concerns and seeking justice, and they were black.
I would definitely say that was true. When you want to raise your critical voice against institutions that are at the top of the society, their immediate response isn't going to be, okay, let's sort this out. Clearly we're institutionally racist. Let's do something about it. They're going to go on the defensive and say, all right, we're going to try and shut this down because we want to be able to protect ourselves. It would be bad for PR if we were known to be institutionally racist, so let's attempt to shut this down. Very quickly, though, on the undercover policing, if we look at what happened at the G8 protests recently...
that was very interesting, actually.
It was very interesting because all of the organisers were preemptively arrested for organising the G8 protests, and that suggests that there's some undercover work going on to find out who these people are, what these people are getting up to. And it was very similar to what happened on the G20 protests, where Ian Tomlinson was killed. So my immediate answer, just as an ordinary citizen, would be there's definitely going to be some undercover still going on.
And can I just say that I think if it was a white family who were protesting, were trying to cast doubt on the credibility of the police, who were trying to destroy public trust and confidence in the police, they were likely to be subjected to the sort of tactics that are being alleged that were used against the Lawrence family. I think the police were in a mode where anybody who was trying to attack them was a legitimate target, whether they were black or whether they were white. The fact is that they were more likely to be black because black people were not getting the sort of
but
response
it still
from the
doesn't,
police.
and I actually probably do agree with you with my experience of the police that, for survival, that they would have lashed out at anyone. But it doesn't make that lashing out right.
Absolutely not. Absolutely
that's
not.
The point.
But what I'm saying is that it's not just because the family were black. The main reason why the police allegedly were trying to smear the Lawrence family was to try and undermine the campaign that was critical of the police.
Okay, we've literally got a few minutes left before the end of the show. I mean, obviously, this is shocking news. This is unacceptable. If all of this proves to be true, in just a minute, if you like, under a minute. I mean, do you have hope? Do you think we should still have confidence and trust in the police, and that it will be better?
Well, if you look at the Metropolitan Police at Scotland Yard, almost all the senior officers are new. They've come from other parts of the country. They are up to date, untainted by these things that happened 15, 20 years ago. And they have to prove that they deserve our trust. But we have to give them a chance, because if you don't like your local supermarket, you can go to another one. If you don't trust the police, who do you turn to?
Yeah. And Shanice, same thing. Do you think there's a long way to go, or?
I'm going to be incredibly cynical and say I don't believe people should have an incredible amount of trust with police, because the thing is, what happened with the Stephen Lawrence case isn't new, and it's been repeated and repeated and repeated. If you go back, if you go forward, it's still going on. Hillsborough, Orgrave, the Stephen Lawrence campaign. You can go to an anti-racist protest as an anti-racist and be arrested for being at that protest. If you look to what happened with the Sapphire unit, when police officers were shelving rape reports because they didn't believe victims, I personally have to be cynical and say that I don't trust the police.
Well, who do you go to if you don't?
Well,
I mean, surely
we have to use the police, but that doesn't necessarily mean we can't maintain a completely critical stance towards the police.
And just briefly, who would you look to put that pressure on to keep that critical objectivity and accountability on the police?
Well, I think if you look back to history of where we've been able to put pressure on people, that's when communities have united together to make a political point. So I think it's not going to be lobbying the government that's going to do it. It's going to be communities recognising there's a problem and standing arm in arm to put pressure on the police.
Okay, well, thank you both for coming in this evening and talking about this really important subject. And I think, the only thing I would add to that, I think, it is our responsibility. I think, unless we as citizens hold the police to account, because they are there to provide us with a service, we can't really just moan. So we have to be a little bit more proactive and take those steps, engage with the police, hold them to account. They have to answer to you. I shall see you next week. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.